Have you ever really stopped to think about the big questions? What does it actually mean to be certain about something? What is true freedom? And how on earth do we build a truly just society? Well, today we're going to dive deep into the mind of one of the 20th century's most incredible Islamic thinkers who tackled all of this head-on, Muhammad Baqir Al-Sadr. So, our guide on this journey is this collection of his essays called We Chose for You. And this is where Al-Sadr really lays out his whole vision. He starts with the absolute basics, how we even know things, and builds all the way up to a blueprint for an entire society. It's fascinating stuff. Okay, let's get into it. So here's the game plan. First, we're going to get to know the man himself, Al-Sadr. Then, we'll unpack his big ideas on knowledge, freedom, and even economics, and see how they all connect. And finally, we'll look at why his work is still so incredibly important today.
So who was Muhammad Baqir Al-Sadr? Well, he was born in Iraq back in 1935, and he was a true force of nature. A philosopher, a legal scholar, an economist, a social theorist, you name it. He was living in a time of massive upheaval, right? The whole world felt like it was caught in this tug of war between two huge competing ideas. So he took it upon himself to build this powerful intellectual framework, a way for the Islamic worldview to confidently engage with both Marxism and Western liberalism. Al-Sadr starts his entire system at the most fundamental place you can imagine, epistemology, which is just a fancy word for the theory of knowledge. Because really, before you can talk about society or freedom, you have to answer one really simple but incredibly deep question.
Seriously, think about it for a second. We're bombarded with information and different opinions all day long. How can we find something solid, something we know is absolutely 100% true? For Al-Sadr, this wasn't some dusty old philosophical question. It was the bedrock for everything else. Okay, so Al-Sadr says there are basically two main paths to knowing stuff. On one side, you've got empirical knowledge. This is what we learn through our senses, right? By seeing, hearing, touching, doing experiments. Then, on the other side, you've got rational knowledge. Think about math, like 1 + 1 = 2. You don't need to run an experiment to know that's true. Your mind just gets it. Now, the reason he makes this distinction is because he was arguing against this really popular idea called positivism. This philosophy basically claimed that the only kind of real knowledge is the stuff you can prove with your senses. If you can't see it, touch it, or measure it, it's not actually knowledge. And that was a huge challenge because it meant that things like morality, purpose, and even God were kind of thrown out the window as things we couldn't know. And this is where Al-Sadr's counter-argument is just so brilliant. He basically says, okay, fine, but what about math? We don't need 1,000 lab tests to be absolutely certain that 2 + 2 = 4. We just know it through reason. Positivism has no good answer for that. So right there, he proves that our minds can access a kind of certainty that goes way beyond just what our senses tell us. And establishing this one point, that rational truth is real, is the key that unlocks his entire system. So let's see how this builds. We go from the foundation of the mind to the foundation of the self. Because if you are certain that your mind can grasp a higher, rational truth, well, that completely changes how you think about your own purpose and your search for freedom.
We throw that word freedom around all the time, don't we? But what do we really mean by it? Freedom from something? Freedom to do something? Al-Sadr argues that the Islamic perspective, which is built on that foundation of certainty we just talked about, completely reframes the whole idea.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The common way of thinking about freedom, especially in the West, is about breaking free from outside things, like getting away from government rules or social pressure. But Al-Sadr explains that the Quranic idea of freedom starts from the inside out. It's about winning the battle against the tyranny of your own lower self, your impulses, your greed, your ego.
This quote just nails it. You can be totally free from any outside rules, right? But if you're a slave to your own anger or your cravings or your ambition, are you actually free? For Al-Sadr, the first and most important fight for freedom is the one that happens inside you. And achieving that self-mastery is a rational choice because you're certain there's a higher purpose than just satisfying every little desire you have.
Okay, so you have people who are grounded in rational certainty, and they're all striving for this deep inner freedom. What's the next logical step? Well, how do these people come together to build a just society? And this is where we get into Al-Sadr's really revolutionary work on Islamic economics.
Al-Sadr lays out a system that stands on three main pillars. First, there's dual ownership. It's not a total free-for-all, but it's not total state control either. It recognizes a place for both private property and public resources. Second,
economic freedom isn't absolute. It's guided by that moral framework we talked about. And third, the whole point of the system is social justice, making sure everyone is cared for.
And this table just lays it all out so clearly. You can see how Al-Sadr's model is really charting a third way. Look at the foundation. Capitalism is built on self-interest. Marxism is built on class struggle. But Islamic economics is built on a moral framework. Look at ownership. One is all private, one is all state. But this model proposes a mix. And maybe most importantly, look at the goal. For the others, it's about material things, profit, or a classless society. But for this one, the goal is both the material and the spiritual health of everyone.
And that's the real kicker. For Al-Sadr, the economy isn't the end goal. It's just a tool. The stock market, business, trade, all of it has to be judged by one simple standard. Does this help us build a more just, a more compassionate, a more moral society full of internally free people? So, after this journey from the nature of truth itself all the way to the structure of society, we land here on the legacy of this incredible thinker. Why does the work of Muhammad Baqir Al-Sadr still hit so hard today?
Well, his legacy is huge. He gave modern Islamic thought a really robust framework to engage with the world's biggest ideas. He offered that third way in economics that tries to blend the best of both worlds with a moral compass. But most of all, he showed how reason and revelation could work together, how that certainty in your mind could be the foundation for both your own personal freedom and a just society for everyone.
And that leaves us with one final question to chew on. We live in a world that loves to separate the spiritual from the material, that often values external freedom more than anything else. So how might Al-Sadr's vision, this totally integrated vision that connects the certainty in our minds, the freedom in our souls, and the justice in our communities, how might that challenge us to see our own world a little differently?